Welcome to Mic'd Up, where stories meet conversations. This is where voices from all walks of life come together to share ideas, experiences, and perspectives that matter. This is where you get to experience what it's like to achieve your endeavors, from facing early challenges to conquering meaningful milestones.
From hurdles to achieving great heights, Mic'd Up brings you people who have built their dreams from scratch, dreamers who dared to start, and doers who kept going. Each story here reminds us that every big success begins with a little spark of determination and belief.
Now let's get into today's podcast with your hosts and special guests right here on Mic'd Up.
Delighted to have you, sir. Thank you so much. A very good morning to all of you. Pleasure to be here. I've been to your Manipal campus many times, 2-3 times in the last few years. So very glad to be here as well. Thank you for inviting me.
So getting back to this, can you please brief the audience about the Milaap and what Milaap does before they get into anything? So they want to hear it towards the founder who have founded. So any of us would have a bias towards saying what Milaap is in our own perspective. I want to know the founder's perspective of Milaap. So what basically Milaap is and what does it do?
Sure. I don't think, you said, have a bias towards what Milaap is per se. I think that's actually a good thing because brand is not what you think you say you are. Brand is what others think you are. So with that, let me tell you what we do. So we are a crowdfunding platform. The basic idea essentially is use internet to do good, where there are people who need resources, primarily money for various utilitarian needs, right? A medical emergency, or to pursue higher education, or to a rural family wanting to set up a small scale business, and so on and so forth, or non-profit organizations wanting to raise money for their causes, sportsmen, and so on. The list is endless. Creative projects. The challenge is how do you mobilize these resources beyond traditional forms of capital, right? Which is, let's say, banks, equity, or CSR, etc. So we pioneered the concept of people-to-people giving, where individuals around the world can directly give money to specific needs, specific what we call as fundraising campaigns, and ensure that they get updates as to what has happened with it. So let's say somebody requires money for undergoing, let's say, a cancer treatment, right? Cost of treatment is say 10 lakh rupees. They have insurance, but the insurance probably covers only for, let's say, 2-3 lakh rupees. They wiped out their savings, right? And they need still 5-6 lakh rupees to sort of go about it, right? So they put their story, they put their appeal online. We do all the background work in ensuring that it is verified, that it is for the intended person and intended cause. And once it is live, people can start contributing from across the world. They can contribute as small as 5 rupees, so to speak, actually 1 rupee, so to speak. And over a period of time, it's almost like a wallet. So as and when the money comes in, people can withdraw the money and use it for their purposes, or direct it for the intended purpose. And the donors keep getting updated on what is the utilization. So yeah, that's essentially what we do.
So as you said, a lot of fundraising happens. So a lot of people over here from a proper metropolitan background has an idea how crowdfunding works. So basically, as a native city or a village person want to do a crowdfunding, and he knows nothing about it. But right now, thanks to UPI, anyone can make a payment. So can you explain the concept of crowdfunding to them? Like what goes on if I have a problem and if I want to put something on Milaap saying that I need assistance in this, what are the steps to be followed in any other crowdfunding platforms, including Milaap and other platforms? Can you please go through it?
Sure. So fundamentally, I think, like you rightly said, we started in 2010. It was a metropolitan and diaspora predominantly focused platform until I would say 2015. So for the first 5 years or so, most of the people wanting to raise money, as well as most of the people contributing were essentially coming from the tier 1 cities as well as the diaspora, so to speak. And then in 2016, some massive shifts happened. UPI happened, Paytm happened, and also the Geo revolution happened, right? And we saw a significant sort of an uptick in tier 2, tier 3 plus, right? And when I say tier 3 plus, I'm talking about places like Sholapur, Jalna, Bareilly, right? Darjeeling, Northeast, Aizawl, and so on and so forth. So, that's the power and beauty of internet. When you have access to it, people find ways to sort of, leverage it, right? And coming to your question, I think the broad principle for any crowdfunding campaign, right? I mean, we are primarily in what I would call as the utilitarian needs. Milaap as a platform is agnostic for any kind of purpose, but most people use it for what you would call as emergencies or needs. But it applies, the framework is very simple. There are 3 questions that needs to sort of be answered. One, does the intended purpose exist, right? The second one is, does the intended person, right, benefits from that purpose, right? And third one essentially is, will the money go towards this need, so to speak, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say somebody wants to raise money for their, let's say, a new prototype that they are building for, let's say, I don't know, waste management, right? I'm just picking something, right? So first question is essentially, is this person who they claim to be, or is this initiative what they claim to be? So if I'm raising, what is my background? Is this, is this a fly-by-night, or is this something that I have been doing for a while, etc. So that verification happens, right? Or that credibility needs to be built. The second one is the idea that we are talking about, does that actually exist, right? If it is a medical need, is there an actual need, so to speak? And there are different ways to sort of figure each of those, right? And the third one is, which is also very important, so I can exist and this idea can also be a reality, but the money that I raise, will it go towards this purpose or not, right? So, and that essentially is what we always advise, encourage people who are using our platform to communicate, right? Who are you? What are you looking for? And how will you use this money for this purpose then? And our role is to essentially sort of work in the background to validate each of those at varying points of time.
Yes, so thank you for this insight. Slightly pivoting the conversation towards Milaap and the founding of the company. So a lot of here students are like third semester students and sixth semester students who wants to start their own venture. As you also started your own venture when you were still studying or pursuing a certain degree in NUS. So how and what are the guidelines would you recommend the people who wants to pursue their own startup? So what zeal do they need? What are the necessities do you think people need to pursue a startup?
That's a very loaded question, so let me try answering the best way possible, right? See, the most important aspect, right, before even giving it a shape as it's a startup, it's a business, a lot of us, and for the right reasons, but a lot of us also sort of get carried away by the idea of starting up, by the idea of starting a business and so on and so forth, right? But, the biggest sort of advantage that, students have, or, young graduates fresh out of college wanting to do is, you have the unlimited time and energy to be obsessed about a problem. You have a view of what the world should be with respect to a certain problem, right? Now, being obsessed and solving for that, right? Attempting to address that. So whether it is you're building a prototype, or whether you're building a, sort of a proof of concept, or whether you're building a website, or whether you're building an app, that should be the first sort of, real sort of focus, right? Not worrying about, is this going to be a startup? How big is this going to be? What will be the scale? When will I raise my funding, etc.? All of those have a time and place, right? Not taking anything from that. If you think of these as a very passionate side project of yours, where you are trying to essentially prove to yourself and to people around you, hey, I have identified this problem and this is my way of addressing this problem, right? I think that's probably the first sort of thing that when you are in college as students, or even fresh out of college, should maniacally focus on, right? And once that happens, right, and whatever is your metric, right, it could be more people using it, or it's probably people coming and telling you, wow, if you make the same thing in a commercial, whatever, commercialize that, we would actually pay for it. Whatever that metric is, and each business, each idea has its own sort of what I call as the fit, right? Once you start seeing it, then you start thinking about, whoa, we've got a business opportunity in our hands. It could still not necessarily be a business in itself, but there's a business opportunity, so to speak, right? And then comes all the bells and whistles around, okay, should I set up a company? Should I do it this way? How will I get the funding? And so on and so forth, right? But when you are in third year, like you said, or in your fourth year, like I said, you have a view of world, you have no constraints, right, that probably people of my age, no longer have, right? Like the moment I think about an idea, I'm immediately tuned into saying, how big is this market? If this is the market, how much, market share? That's both the good and the bad thing of experience, right? Because you have a certain way of looking at opportunities. Whereas when you're young and naive, and if I may say so, sometimes stupid like I was, you are just obsessed about that problem and you want to solve it. Like when we started Milaap, right? So my background was I was studying in Singapore. Then I was, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. In fact, I learned that there is a word called entrepreneurship when I went to Singapore. Until then, I didn't even know that the word existed, right? And then the banking crisis happened in 2008. So I wanted to become an investment banker, but the banking crisis happened. So I came back, basically pushed my graduation by a year so that I don't lose my student visa. Right? So if you graduate and you don't have a job in 30 days, you get kicked out of Singapore. So I didn't want to lose my student visa, so I said, people will kick me out if I graduate. What if I don't graduate and I take a leave of absence? So that's how I took a leave of absence and I came back to India and I ended up working in a microfinance institution. Right? Chance, somebody connected something and I ended up there. No real rhyme or reason per se. But then that's where I ended up, stumbling upon something that truly obsessed me, right? One thing led to another, and I was asking, three questions that came out, during those conversations, like how small amounts of money can have an impact in lives of people, right? We are talking about people needing 2,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, not to do something whatever, big bang, but to, get themselves out of a situation that they are currently in, right? The second question that was very, that I was obsessed with was how even access to such small amounts of money was a pipe dream for most of the population, right? India is massive, right? And I'm talking about 2008, 2009, where the democratization of internet or even financial services hadn't happened, right? There was a challenge for people to even have access to it. People who have been, borrowers for 10 years, 15 years, paying on time, still didn't have a credit history where, so they're looked as the same as the person who is a fresh borrower, simply because there was no documentation, record, nothing was linked to that, right? And the third one was how the look at capital was very different, right? So I went and told all these cool stories to my friends when I went back to Singapore, and I told them, and somebody said, $50, that's what it takes to help this person. You know, I would just give that money. I would give $500, help 10 people, right? And suddenly something struck, and I was like, you know, the way people think about capital, right? Depending on the, you know, where they are, is very different from where people need capital, and that's essentially how one thing led to another. Now, in 2009, that's where the idea of, you know, why don't we source money from individuals and give it to individuals, right, came about, right? And there was Kickstarter and other things in the US, but those were more focused on creative projects and so on. And I wanted to sort of do something in this sort of space. And I reached out to, you know, some folks, you know, in the industry, and they said, this can't be done. There are RBI regulations that will not allow you to sort of bring in, you know, foreign capital into India. So that's a, you know, pipe dream. And the moment somebody said this can't be done, that, you know, triggered something in me. And I was like, why can't it be done? Like, what is so whatever, you know, this is an idea, you know, this is a net positive idea, why can't it be done? Was very obsessed with this, started pouring through every RBI's master circular, documents, etc., reading through it, and we realized that there is a way by which it could be done, but it required us to sort of build it in a certain way, right? So we thought through this. In all of this, I was never thinking about this as a company or a whatever, startup or anything. I was just obsessed with this idea, right? Nothing else. And then we put together something, cold emailed RBI, right? Hoping that, you know, I still remember, guess the RBI email IDs, general manager at rbi.gov.in, and found their name, first name, last name. And you know what? Somebody actually replied, right? The general manager replied, and she said, please come down, I want to hear from you, right? So, came all the way from Singapore to Bombay, went, met them, and I told them this is who we are and all that stuff. And she asked, how old are you? I said, I'm 21, my other founder was 26. And they were like, okay, you know what? We don't quite think that this is feasible in the long term, but we will give you a permission to sort of do this as a small pilot of a certain limit. So they allocated us $10,000 limit, where we could essentially bring, you know, what is called as the external commercial borrowings, because external commercial borrowings is what the Ambanis and the Adanis use for infrastructure projects in India. And here I was saying that I'm going to crowdfund, organize it in Singapore, and then lend it, and so on. So they were very fascinated, intrigued that somebody actually spent some time figuring those regulations to apply here. And we were overjoyed. We were like, oh, RBI has given us license. They just gave us $10,000. They were like, okay, this is not going to do anything to the economy or like weaken or stabilize or whatever, right? And I took that, went to Singapore to my university, entrepreneurship cell again, and I said that we've got this. We want to get started. Could you please help us anyway, because we want to build a website, we have to build some compliances. And my university essentially issued me a $9,600 grant, saying that the grant is a no strings attached. All we want to see is a functioning website where you have shown that you have helped at least 100 users, right? Until that happened, right, there was no company, there was nothing. Only when we had to actually get the license from RBI, they said, okay, now you need to have an incorporation, you need to have these setups, etc., right? So it took us 18 months in that process, right? If I had thought about this as a company and venture and whatnot, after 6 months I would have moved on to the next big thing, right? I would have read what is the next big thing in TechCrunch and whatnot, and I would have just moved on, right? And that's what most rational people would have done, right? Because it makes no sense to do this for like 18 months without even knowing whether you will get it or not get it, etc. So that's what my view, there are different ways to do it, but my view is students have unlimited time, energy, and no constraints in their thought process. So be obsessed about that problem. It doesn't matter whether it is a startup that will get X valuation, Y valuation. You have a way of looking at the world, go for it, right? And then let reality hit you later, that's fine, but just go with that when you're starting.
So as you
sorry, very long answer, but sorry.
No problem, sir. As you said, yeah, once an idea comes in a student's mind, we have to pursue it, and then later is later. So, again, as you said, Milaap was founded. First of all, you said that most of the crowdfunding happened from Singapore in the initial stage. So, as you said, people have a different perspective of capital based on the region. So, the Singapore people were willing to fund crowdfunding or, for a cancer patient or whatever. But when it comes to India, I think you have around 2,000 crores plus fundings in Milaap, among which 1,500 plus are medical reasons. How did you make or convince or appreciate the donor who is donating from India? So the Indian mindset towards the capital is slightly different from Singapore. So what kind of effort did your team put in, or what kind of insights can you give to the people who wants to do the similar thing?
See, fundamentally it's about, so just to, let me give the high level and then go to it. So today, I mean, yeah, you said we've mobilized close to 2,500 crores plus. On a monthly basis, around 75 to 80% of our capital comes from India, right? Less than 20% comes. When we started out, it was almost the reverse, right? And more importantly, out of that 75%, if I were to look at it, roughly 50% of that comes from tier 1 and the remaining 50% comes from tier 2 plus, right? So it's no longer just a metropolitan phenomena, goes beyond, so to speak, right? Coming to the question in terms of the donor mindset, see, it's fundamentally your belief about the society, right? I inherently believe that all people are inherently good and empathetic, right? And when given an opportunity to sort of support or help that resonates with them, they will do it, right? That's the philosophy that which I approach, right? Now there are thought process around India is a low trust society. The Western societies or the developed countries are a high trust society, which is true, right? But that doesn't mean that most people think low trust society essentially means nobody gives, right? You equate it as saying that nobody will give, nobody will whatever. It's just the definition of how you have to think about your business. In a low trust society, I will view you with suspicion until you prove me wrong. Right? That's low trust society. So if somebody comes with something that is very new or too good to be true, the fundamental belief is this guy is a scamster. But if he proves me wrong, I am a customer for life. Right? The high trust society is essentially, I inherently believe if you come up with the same idea in a high trust society, wow, that's so cool. They are doing something so innovative. Right? I'm going to be a customer for life until you break that person's trust, right? In which case they are gone, right? So, in both the ways, right, whether you're building for consumers in India or building for the Western world or whatever, so on to speak, earning the trust is very important. The question essentially is, what does it take for you, right? Which is why models which are inherently, sort of from the West, when you just take it and copy it and paste it here, they don't necessarily sort of work, simply because there are some things that are taken for granted, right? Like for example, customer service is mostly self-serve, right? Like you have a question, They would say, go to the knowledge base, you could look at the knowledge base, you could figure this out. If you're not happy with the knowledge base, you could write us an email and we'll reply within 24 hours. And that's completely fine for the customer there, right? Because that's the society, that's essentially how they are, right? Whereas here, let's say somebody attempts to make a payment and the money gets debited, I get an SMS, the money gets debited, but you take them to the failure page, sorry, your payment failed. You're going to get a phone call, you're going to simultaneously get a WhatsApp message, and then you will get a email, all of that within 20-30 minutes, right? Now you can't sit here and say, oh, this is ridiculous, how could this be? It's the nature of the customer. So you have to build your business to the customers that you're serving, rather than saying the customer is whatever, customer is unreasonable or whatever. Of course, there's a joke where, I tell my team, because we get these every single day. I say, look, you can never satisfy 3% of the customers, right? When people call us and L and whatever, etc. per se, right? You can never satisfy 3% of the customers, because what they need is therapy, which is they want somebody to listen to them, right? They may be wrong, but they are just frustrated with whatever the situation, and you just have to listen to them. You are not here to prove yourself right, etc. But for the remaining set of customers, as long as you show that you are empathetic and you are responsive, you will start earning that trust, right? So to give you told me about the number. First 3 years, cumulatively we did 1 crore in fundraising. From 3 to 6 years, we did around 50 crores or 60 crores cumulatively, right? From 2016 to 2020, that number became, I think, some 700 crores or whatever, we grew whatever. And from 2020 to 2024, that 700 became 2,500. So it's never a linear thing, right? So for a long period of time, it was just like this, and then there were some shifts that helped us to move, and then there are some shifts that helped us to move. But the principles remain the same, right? You are serving people in a low trust society, which means you have to earn their trust every single day, right? It doesn't change because I've been here for 15 years, so I can take it for granted. No, even if this company lives for 50 years, the question remains the same, which is how do I earn, right? Not how do I break, how do I earn? Because by default, you have not earned their trust.
Earning about the trust, as you said, your revenue started stagnant. At 2020, you got around, I say, 20x of 10x of growth in the entire fundraising part. So, what was the impact of COVID in that?
Yeah, so COVID was the biggest inflection point for us, both from visibility and making crowdfunding mainstream, and also sort of solving for some misconceptions or some ideas around what it was and so on and so forth, right? Because I think in general, and this is true, I think that all things bad about COVID and how this had impact in our lives and so on. One of the silver linings of it was a great equalizer. It was a great equalizer in the sense that no matter who you are, what level of the society you were, etc. There are some things where humanity trumps, right? And there are some things that just can't be just accessed because of who you are, right? And we've all sort of went through that curve, so to speak. So during COVID, it was interesting because when COVID, sort of the lockdown was announced, we used to have a model which says anyone who is raising money for not a personal purpose, for a larger societal purpose like, let's say, natural disasters or causes, we don't charge a fee, right? Until then we used to charge a 5% fee, but for natural disasters like flood, relief, etc., we don't charge a fee, so we absorb whatever costs we incur in running the ops. So when COVID lockdown was informed, we said, hey, this is similar to a sort of a large-scale impact on people, etc. So we will waive off our fee, right? Usually we used to do it because those were the, like 10% of the fundraisers would be that, 90% would be for some medical needs, etc. So we kind of like, manage it. What we didn't realize was like, all the fundraisers were essentially for COVID relief, so to speak, right? Because nothing else was really required. It was a lockdown and so on and so forth. So April 2020 was the most interesting month in our business. We had the highest growth in monthly volumes, like in terms of, like there was a 5x more in terms of donations that we raised vis-a-vis March 2020. And because we were not charging any fee or whatever, and the server cost, because suddenly we were now scaling and serving 200,000 visits a month, which was previously 40,000 visits a month, or 200,000 visits a day, sorry, which was like 30,000 visits or 25,000 visits previous whatever. We were incurring a lot of infrastructure costs and all of those and so on. So our bottom line was also the most red it has ever been, the most negative it had been. So, we had a unique situation where the platform grew so well, and but we lost so much money that we had like some 3 months or 4 months of cash in bank, or 5 months of cash in bank. So we were asking ourselves, what would we do, right? Option A was go back and tell them, hey, we are going to reverse this and we are going to start charging 5% fee again, right? And then we realized that would be a disaster, both from communications as well as from all the work that we had done in 10 years, like I told you, right? Earning the trust, right? What would a customer say, when we needed the most, you've broken our trust, right? So we were like, that's not possible. What else could we do? We just said, okay, we could charge some people something. Then I was like, this is so unstandardized. And one of our customer service executives, right, like was like a 22-year-old boy. He was listening, and we were all doing this as video calls because, right, we were all working from whatever our homes. He said, sir, I have a suggestion. And I was like, yeah, tell me, what is it? So yesterday during my call, somebody called us and said they wanted to contribute, etc. I explained. They said, you're not charging any fee. And I said, yes, we are not charging any fee. Then that person said, can I give you some donation so that you can run? Because I don't realize how you will be able to run this, right? So maybe, sir, we can ask some donations while people are contributing, saying if you want, you can contribute. So that idea of going 0% platform fee did not come from some strategic thinking or founders coming up. It came from a customer service executive who essentially said, hey, this is the feedback that I heard from one of the users who had reached out. And we said, what's the harm? We are anyway in rock bottom, we are earning nothing. So maybe some people will give, some people will not. We'll go back to our investors if we are really, down to our last month, etc. And when we put that out and we made that communication clear, we were amazed by the sort of support that we received, right? And in 4 months, we realized that, hey, you know what? This should be the model for future, where I am not going to determine as a platform what is the value of the service to my donor or to my beneficiaries, organizers. Let them decide, right? Let them use it and let them decide, right? So today, 2/3 of our donors leave a tip, right? Half of my beneficiaries essentially leave a tip. While withdrawing the money, they say, we never expected to raise so much money, but we raised, we want to just contribute a small portion from this one, right? So, yes, technically we call it free platform because it's easier to sort of communicate, but what in reality is, we essentially say, pay what you wish, right? Because, I can't be free from that concept. Somebody has to pay, right? And we asked ourselves, what is the best way? We said, let customers determine how much they want to pay after using my service, which is what software companies do in the form of free trials, right? Use for 30 days, use it for free. If you're happy, then subscribe, right? Unfortunately, we did not have that a similar structure. We said, okay, let them use the platform and then let them determine what it is. So in many ways, it also shifted our thinking about the business, about the culture, and so on. Because now, if I don't serve my customer well, he's not going to leave me a tip, right? So customer service is now aligned to the business and the business revenues.
So yes, sir, as you said, I think the past 10 years or the 15 years which you've been working towards this idea, so later on in 2020, the trust which you have built with the consumers have brought you about the tips which they have left. So I think the first essential thing I would learn from you is building the trust with the consumers and building the trust with the entities who we are dealing the business with. And coming back to the business aspect of it, so as we see in US, there's a lot of consumer products which have their first round of initial product raise their funds through Kickstarter or multiple crowdfunding platforms. And when it comes to India, I don't see a big number of platforms doing that. So what is your opinion on that? Does crowdfunding a prototype idea or a consumer goods startup work in India or not?
See, couple of things to keep in mind, right? So, when we say crowdfunding from a financial perspective, there are three forms broadly, right? One is crowdfunding debt, which is loans, crowdfunding equity, which is like people are getting in exchange of a percentage or shares in your company, and the third one is crowdfunding contributions. Now, this could be just charitable in the sense that I don't expect anything in return, or this could be something like, contributions with something attached, which is essentially rewards or access, or I get a prototype and so on and so forth, right? Now, crowdfunding equity in India is sort of ruled out because, and for right sort of reasons, where only a certain profile of people can do. There's an accredited investor concept. So you and I cannot put in 500,000 rupees and get equity directly in a company, so to speak. So there are vehicles, etc., so to speak, right? So, and crowdfunding loans again, very, very, very regulated, so to speak, in form of P2P lending and so on, for various good reasons, so to speak. Now, if you are, as a result of it, you're now sort of, when you're talking about crowdfunding per se, you're purely thinking about it in two ways. One, charitable sort of, contributions, or something where you are able to sort of provide some kind of rewards, access, order, etc., right? Depending on what the nature of your idea and product or service is how you would essentially determine one of those. So if you are somebody who is essentially building a product or service that is directly relevant to the person who is contributing, right? Or a segment of people. Let's say you are making a innovative walking stick for elderly or for visually challenged, etc. Right? There is a segment of population for which it is directly relevant per se. So what unfortunately, platforms that are focused on crowdfunding for rewards really haven't taken off in India, simply because all of it also boils down to where we are as a country in terms of economy, right? We are still a $2,000 plus per capita country, so it is unfair for us to sort of, the unfortunate reality is we have the same access as a $70,000 per capita person, living in United States. Our aspirations are there, but our reality is also that you have to realize that we are still a developing world. So the whole idea of, being able to contribute for creative projects, cool projects as a platform will take some time to come. And I'm assuming somebody sitting here or some other college would essentially listen to this and say, no, that's rubbish, and here's how we are going to do it, right? Because from my perspective, I'm looking at it purely from market, people, etc. But that's how innovations and disruptions happen. But coming to your question, how can somebody do it? The best way to do it is to put up your own platform, and today you can build this on WordPress to whatnot, Shopify to whatnot, right? And instead of calling it crowdfunding, you can essentially call this as pre-order, right? So this is my prototype, this is my video of how this would impact, etc. So you show people that, hey, this thing can actually exist and this thing can actually benefit you, the person, right? Or somebody like you, right? But for us to do this, we need money. We need money to sort of build these prototypes, or we need money to procure some licenses, etc. per se. So if you are in a product kind of a service, or if you are in some kind of a subscription kind of a service, etc., right? Go directly to the consumer, call it a pre-order, call it a subscription, because that's the best form of funding that you can. Revenue is the best form of funding because it doesn't lie, right? It doesn't tell you anything, it doesn't flatter you, it doesn't put you down. It is the reality, right? So get pre-orders, and you set up a company. It's so easy today, right? 15 years ago, to get a payment gateway license, I had to walk into 10 payment gateway offices to essentially explain what we were doing, and they all said, oh, high risk, high risk, high risk. But today, there are dime a dozen payment gateway with best in class payment experiences, so to speak, and you set up a company, you can get onboarded on, or an LLP, whatever, you get onboarded on Razorpay or Cashfree or any of these platforms in like 7 days, and you can set up a platform on Shopify or WordPress on your own. It costs next to nothing to sort of accept contributions. The real challenge is not accepting contributions. The real challenge is what you do after you get those contributions. Do you stay truthful to your purpose? Do you actually ship them? If you don't, for whatever reasons, are you willing to sort of return that money back? Are you willing to make that effort to do it? That's where, it comes in. So if the short answer to your question, can this happen at an individual project levels? Yes. The long answer, which is essentially, can this be a platform in itself where people can put? I think we are still a while to go.
Thanks for that, sir. As you said, the pre-order. I think a lot of people are currently doing the pre-order strategy in Indian market too, and I think a lot of them are successful in the pre-order categories also. And moving on to the next question, you had recently started a new venture in US, which is based on affordable pharmaceuticals for US healthcare. So can you please let us know how does that work, and what is your opinion on opening the venture, and how are you planning to manage Milaap as well as the other venture?
So broadly 2-3 reasons, so to speak. So I've been running Milaap for 14-15 years, which is technically a generation, right? So every generation is 15 years, right? So I think post-COVID and 2023, I started asking, what do I really want this organization to be, right? Do I want this to be built and essentially, sort of packaged and sold to somebody, get acquired or not? Or do I want this to be a organization that is running, that lasts beyond my lifetime and continues to run, but runs sustainably, profitably, which is very important, so to speak. And it's not that I chose the second one immediately. We did explore the first, but we realized that the trade-offs for the first is much higher. So we wanted to build an organization that continues to sort of grow, continues to sort of have an impact. And when you have that vision, it is very important. Most people, in the social space, have this sort of a thought process. Corporate was too tough, so now I'm moving into social sector, right? And that's the biggest misconception somebody can have. Social sector or work in social space or anything to do is incredibly harder. Why? Because primarily it is taken in social sector because the governments couldn't solve it, the market couldn't solve it, right? For whatever reasons, right? Which is why the pilferage and the leakage had happened, and the civil society has said, either in the form of non-profits or in the form of social, etc. So it's in whatever problem that you're trying to tackle in the social space is incredibly harder. So you need people who have that energy and motivation to sort of do that, right? So that would only happen when you realize that you build a culture where people can see that growth, right? And if I am sitting at the top, like a lid on a bucket, right? Then people can't see beyond, right? So I said that, it's time for me to sort of actively transition out from an operating role and sort of build the next set of leadership to sort of come in, right? So that was the motivation for sort of getting started. And then I realized now if I were to, sort of move out, then what will I do with my life, right? And, after running for many, many years, you realize that the only reason you do a startup is you cannot not do a startup, right? There's no other sort of reason. So I said, okay, I wanted to start something new. And something that is, again, at the intersection of what I have learned and what I have experienced. And we realized one thing led to another, long story, one thing led to another, focused on healthcare space. And we realized that if there is one problem, or actually, one problem that is universal, right? Apart from climate change and climate issues, it's essentially healthcare. Affordable healthcare is a universal problem. Whether you are in a developed world or whether you are in a developing world, it is a universal problem. Affordable healthcare is broken. And that's how we ended up sort of, chance visit to US. One of my co-founders of this, an ex-colleague, she is a patient herself, and learning about the challenges that patients have even in a country like US with insurance and all of those, but the costs, etc., led me to sort of say, why not address this. So the concept is simple, making healthcare affordable for everyone. The starting point we have essentially looked at it is essentially medications. But the ethos, the culture, and the thought process is all similar to what we've been doing at Milaap.
Yeah, I think we have gone a little over time in this conversation.
So sorry.
Yeah, thank you for your insight. So one final question to the audience. So as you made yourself a startup which is running successful and profitable, so how would you recommend a student or an individual to start working on a social cause? And why do you think is it necessary for a person who is working on an industry or who is working in a idea? What is the role of social impact should be there of that?
Okay. First things first, slightly controversial. Don't start social cause because you think you have to do in social cause, right? Starting up something that could eventually become a company in itself is a social cause in a country like India, because what India needs is more new jobs, and new jobs can get created only through entrepreneurship, right? So don't be obsessed with the idea of whether this is a social cause, not a social cause, etc., right? Go for an idea that deeply resonates with you, right? Which eventually, that like I spoke about, which has some proof of concept, and once that becomes a proof of concept, think of it as a business opportunity per se. So that would be my primary sort of an answer. The secondary answer, as an extension to that, is once you started out, think about the stakeholders, and I always rank my stakeholders as the customers come first, the employees come next, the other stakeholders, the shareholders come third, and I come last, right? Because I have sold this to all the three other stakeholders, so to speak. So always think from the perspective of, am I doing the right thing for the customer? Because there are many times in your journey, you can do stuff which may not be necessarily right for the customer, but could benefit the other aspects, so to speak, right? In some cases, you can get away with it for a while, but in the long term, like I said, where we are, the society, etc. So always ask, is this the right thing to do for my customers? Followed by, is this the right thing to do for my employees, people who have trusted their careers with me? And then think about, is this the right thing to do for my stakeholders? If all of this is there, then look for yourself. That's essentially how I would say. So don't be obsessed with this has to have social relevance, this has to change. Sure, if that is what your calling is, that is what you deeply resonate with, that's completely fine. But if your calling, for example, is to make comics or video games, don't really worry about what is the social impact. Of course, do no harm is a very important piece. But if you do all of this and if you create jobs, that itself, I think, is a massive impact that you can create.
Thank you for the insightful talk, sir. I think satisfying the customers and satisfying the stakeholders would be the priority of any idea, as from your words. And I think it is most relevant to the recent industries also.
Thank you for tuning into Mic'd Up, where founders share the real stories behind building their dreams. Today's talk was truly insightful and was packed with lessons of growth, creativity, and the power of persistence.
Stay tuned for more such conversations on inspiring journeys and bold ideas that shape the world around us. We'll be back with more fun, more lessons, and more inspiration, exploring what it truly means to dream, build, and believe. Until then, keep building, keep believing, and keep creating your own story.